la destrucción de objetivos militares, los llamados daños colaterales, 5 muertos y 21 heridos civiles. Tan poco creíble como la anunciada retirada es el supuesto motivo de ella, que las fuerzas serbias hayan cumplido su misión de derrotar a la guerrilla albano-kosovar. El lunes hubo enfrentamientos en torno a Podujevo, cuyas viviendas fueron incendiadas por el fuego cruzado, obligando a sus habitantes a huir. También ha habido combates en la zona de Kasari, en manos de la guerrilla, que cuenta en ese lugar con voluntarios procedentes de Estados Unidos, Alemania y Francia, y con el apoyo aéreo de la OTAN.
La OTAN está... Que se ha acabado el dinero, que no está llegando la ayuda económica prometida por Occidente para desgracia de los más necesitados. Allí en los campamentos se viven tremendas historias personales como la que hoy nos contaba nuestro compañero José Antonio Guardiola. En un campamento de Macedonia ha localizado a estos 2 adolescentes que están viendo, no saben nada de su padre, le perdieron la pista en Kosovo, su madre, enferma del riñón, viajó hace días a España, está ingresada en un hospital de Madrid recibiendo tratamiento de diálisis. Ahora esperan reencontrarse pronto con ella.
CBS Evening News. With Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. The siege of the U.S. Embassy in Beijing began to ease somewhat today, but not before China used the mistaken NATO bombing of its embassy in Belgrade to grab center stage in the Balkan conflict. After 4 days, the state-run Chinese press finally reported U.S. apologies for the Belgrade bombing, but the damage was already done. As CBS's Barry Peterson shows you in exclusive pictures from inside the U.S. Embassy under attack.
As you could see, that was right at me, so I'm going to be heading out now.
This was the scene as described by a U.S. official inside one of several American diplomatic buildings targeted by protesters.
Every office has a little bit of destruction. They're getting actually pretty accurate. They know where the windows are.
It was at the embassy itself that protesters concentrated their rage and their rocks.
There's the car that got pretty much pummeled with rocks.
Despite the lessons of U.S. embassy complexes attacked in Africa, buildings here and the people inside were still vulnerable. Just bars on the windows would have helped.
This one is just a wide open one, and this has the bars on it. So they really do make a big difference and prevent large rocks or minimize the chance of larger rocks.
Trapped inside, the U.S. Ambassador James Sasser, who late tonight felt safe enough to venture outside for the first time in 4 days.
There have been thousands of people coming through here, throwing all kinds of missiles, rocks, bottles. There's still bottles here that have liquid in them that appear to be gasoline.
In the worst of it, the ambassador and his staff started burning sensitive documents, afraid the crowd would get in, seize important papers, and do this kind of damage to the whole building. And what does an ambassador want after 4 days, sleeping in his office and eating combat rations? Exactly what the rest of us would want.
It'll be good to get home and get a good hot shower.
Barry Peterson, CBS News, Beijing.
Serb forces were reported on the attack against ethnic Albanian rebels in Kosovo today. This came just a day after the Yugoslav army said it was pulling some forces out of Kosovo, a claim rejected today by the NATO allies. CBS's David Martin has the latest on the combat.
The aftermath of another night and day of airstrikes is the smoking evidence that despite the announcement of a partial troop withdrawal from Kosovo, Serb President Milosevic has not cajoled NATO into a bombing pause.
Number one, we have seen no evidence of any partial pullout. Number two, a partial pullout would mean a total victory for him. Partial pullout is not acceptable.
The Serb army is actually digging in, erecting fortifications along likely invasion routes. NATO has 12,000 troops in Macedonia, a 5,000-man American task force in Albania, and Marines offshore, but no plans for an invasion.
In fact, U.S. officials say if the Serb army were to pull out of Kosovo tomorrow, NATO would not even be prepared to send in a peacekeeping force.
Plans for beefing up the peacekeeping force have been delayed by allies who do not want to divert attention from the air war. which officials say will continue to intensify with more planes and more bases, allowing NATO to strike from any direction at any time. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The United Nations reports 3,600 more ethnic Albanians have fled Kosovo, bringing the total of refugees to 747,000. No one outside Serbia disputes those figures, but inside Serbia, as CBS's John Roberts reports, it's a different world and an incredibly different story.
The first days of the refugee crisis were a production worthy of Hollywood, says a Yugoslav government minister, an elaborate plan to demonize the Serbs and their country.
In this screenplay, 20,000 Albanians, actually 3,000 to 4,000 families, were used as stand-ins in this big production.
The official, Goran Matić, claimed a group of Albanians was paid $6 a day each to travel from Kosovo to Macedonia, on to Albania and Montenegro, then back into Kosovo to begin the journey again. It gave, he said, the appearance of a mass exodus.
Albanians were doing circles, going in circles. Where were these refugees?
According to the minister, the refugee crisis was a made-for-TV event of the most sinister proportions. Conceived by the U.S. government, researched by the CIA, and executed by the international media, which financed its field operations from numbered Swiss bank accounts. That, said NATO, was a script no one would buy.
I must say that of all the hypotheses and theories put forward in recent days to explain the terrible outpouring of refugees from Kosovo, this one probably qualifies for the Sick Joke of the Year award.
Still, Yugoslavia contends NATO bombing created the refugee problem and provided these pictures of Serb forces digging Albanians from the rubble of a NATO attack. But with propaganda a central part of this war, the truth is difficult to prove. John Roberts, CBS News, Belgrade.
Że brakuje pieniędzy na pomoc dla 750 000 osób, które dotarły do Albanii i Macedonii. Z obiecanych $143 milionów, wysoki komisarz dostał niewiele więcej niż połowę.
Target was a plant producing prefabricated sections to repair some of the scores of bridges cut by almost 50 days of air raids, the latest of which concentrated on industry and communications. 13 people claimed wounded in the attack were treated at the town's hospital. As the air campaign stepped up after a weekend lull, Serbia's deputy information minister told Sky News the authorities were about to offer proof of the military withdrawals from Kosovo, which NATO has cast doubt on.
Tomorrow you shall hear exact numbers of the army, soldiers and police forces and special police unit withdrawn from Kosovo and Metohija. We shall give the right numbers. We are providing evidence for that.
The minister, who's previously refused interviews to English-speaking broadcasters after the attack on Belgrade TV, also spoke of the government's willingness now to accept a UN presence in Kosovo.
We do accept United Nations decisions by United Nations that are accepted by the Security Council, for instance.
On the streets of the capital, the return of air raids to within 10 miles away was little deterrent to Belgraders determined to enjoy open-air cafes and the good weather, many sensing a possible end now in sight. So as this moves towards its 8th week, the cost, human and material, mounting, there are signs here that the government is increasingly fixed on a strategy to bring the UN more into a potential peacekeeping resolution. Though whether NATO, having come so far with the air campaign, will be content to be diplomatically sidelined, will determine just how long this conflict continues. Jeff Mead, Sky News, Belgrade.
And as the air raids continue, the UN is warning bolts from Kukas on the Kosovo-Albania border.
For once, the Kosovo border crossing was empty of refugees today, giving NATO jets the chance to pound Serbian troop positions nearby. The fact that Allied warplanes are hitting targets so close to the border, however, has increased fears of Serbian retaliation. Both NATO and the UN know heavy artillery is pointed at northern Albania and its ever-swelling population. Clearing the refugee camps, however, is no easy task. People moved once at gunpoint, reluctant to take another step further from their homes across the border.
it was our plan, and it is our plan, that we should provide better conditions of living for you and for your children than this.
100,000 refugees are camped around the town of Kukes, within easy range of the Serbian positions being targeted by NATO. Despite that danger and the often squalid conditions, people don't want to leave.
We are used to the shellings and we are used to the threats, but anyway, if we have to leave, we will leave, but not with our own free will.
Conditions here are about as primitive as you could possibly imagine. There's no running water, there aren't even any toilets. Yet beyond that mountain range behind me is Kosovo, and being close to their homeland is all these people really care about. Chris Roberts, Sky News, in Kukes, northern Albania.
And accept a political agreement on Kosovo's future. But in Beijing today, yet again, angry Chinese demanded an end to NATO bombing. NATO's disastrous hitting of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade has altered the balance of power. Now it's Russia, allied to an outraged China, that is controlling the diplomatic agenda. Whether there's
to Croatia, Peter Galbraith is now a professor at the National War College in Washington. He believes talk of a peacekeeping force in Kosovo is premature.
I don't think there's a realistic opening for a peace agreement at the present time. Milosevic is willing to make some concessions because, in fact, he has consolidated his hold on Kosovo. He has the upper hand. The NATO airstrikes have not been able to damage his control in Kosovo, and I don't know that they've inflicted that much damage on the forces he has in Kosovo. So he's willing to make some negotiations, but I don't think he's going to go very far to meeting any of the NATO core demands. And what's going on with Chernomyrdin is really a sideshow at this point in time.
Do you think then NATO is right to stand firm on the issue of airstrikes, or should they be considering other, perhaps military options?
Well, I don't think that NATO should engage in a pause because of these negotiations. But I do think that NATO is striking the wrong targets. I think it's a great mistake to bomb urban areas. It inevitably leads to civilian casualties, or you can have catastrophic errors, such as the bombing of the Chinese embassy, and it gains very little military advantage. And the same point can be made about the destruction of Yugoslavia's infrastructure, which will have to be repaired because nobody will want Yugoslavia at the end of this to be a failed state. Yugoslavia won't have the resources, so inevitably the bill will be picked up by the West.
Briefly then, do you...
General Wesley Clark, commanding NATO's operation against Kosovo, visits the air crews spearheading the assault. He may lead the most powerful military alliance in history, but he's also heavily constrained by having to reconcile the wishes and worries of 19 nations. But after a slow start, the military results he reads about are looking better. The sunshine that greets him at Gioia del Colle Air Base is one key reason. Better weather means more missions, and air crews can find more of the hardest targets. Over 350 Serb military vehicles in Kosovo have now been destroyed, with more today.
We went out and looked, and I found 3 armored personnel carriers that were trying to hide, and who had probably been up to no good in the previous days, and they were going to be up to no good tonight. But we found them, and we attacked them with our free-fall weapons and destroyed them.
NATO's attacks are mainly focused in 2 areas: the strategically vital north, where they believe the Serbs may seek a partition in some kind of compromise deal, and the southwest, where the Serbs are trying to cut off the supply corridor for the Kosovo Liberation Army.
We are continuing the pressure, forcing them to concentrate on hiding from our attacks and leaving them less time to continue their offensive operations.
What aircrews aren't seeing is any sign of a pullout. Instead, commanders say they seem to be digging in for a long war, while attack aircraft like the RAF's Harriers try to stop them building defensive lines. Increasingly effective strikes are causing immense damage to the Serb army. But the issue is, will it force President Milosevic to back down? NATO believes it's only military pressure that's made President Milosevic talk of withdrawing troops and diplomatic solutions. So they say their best policy is not to slow down, but speed up their bombing campaign, which is now benefiting from better weather, more experience, and more aircraft. Mark Leahy, BBC News, Gioia del Colle.
NATO planes have been carrying out bombing missions for almost 50 days now, and high on their list of targets have been units of the Yugoslav army. NATO says there's evidence that morale has been severely affected, with signs that some soldiers are now unwilling to fight. The BBC's Orla Guerin has spoken to Yugoslav deserters who are now in hiding in Hungary.
They queue outside foreign embassies in Budapest from early morning, hoping for a visa and a fresh start. These days, among the crowds, there are more and more men who have fled Yugoslavia illegally. They want to leave the war in Kosovo and the atrocities behind them.
There's no way of knowing exactly how many have deserted the Yugoslav army or dodged the draft. Those who have prefer to hide it, even here in Hungary where they're safe. But Yugoslav men of military age are turning up at Western embassies in Budapest looking for a way out.
It's hard to get a view inside the Yugoslav army, but in this detention center near the Hungarian border, we found a young deserter. A Muslim and a conscript, he told me he will never forget what he witnessed.
I saw about 30 civilians being killed. They were trying to flee to Albania. They mowed them down and then collected the bodies on a truck and threw them away. There was a woman and children among them.
When your unit was involved in burning down houses and in killing civilians, what did the soldiers say afterwards? What was their attitude?
Some of them actually enjoyed it, killing people and stealing from them. I'd say half of the army did not agree, but the other half didn't mind and took part in these things. They took pleasure in it.
We found another deserter in hiding at a refugee center in Hungary. This man is a Serb. In Kosovo, he was an army sniper. He'd like to forget the past, but even with tranquilizers, he can't escape the memories of ethnic cleansing.
During the cleansing, they didn't care if the people were big or small. I didn't kill any women or children, but the order was to cleanse the villages. People would be warned to get out, but if they didn't leave, the villages would be cleansed anyway.
NATO would like a lot more Yugoslav soldiers to leave the horror behind them and slip across the border into Hungary after dark. But it would take a mass exodus to bring Milosevic down, and so far there's no sign of that. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Hungary.
Near Sombor, close to the Hungarian and Croatian borders. Serb state television said that near a bridge in the center of Mladic Han, 2 people died when NATO bombs hit a residential area. And around Pristina, the regional capital of Kosovo, there were several missile attacks on villages. But on day 50 of the NATO campaign, there's a growing question about the effectiveness of the airstrikes. John Lyon reports now on the continuing search for a diplomatic solution and how that could be affected by events in Moscow today.
With Moscow in political turmoil, the American envoy Strobe Talbot arrived to discuss Kosovo. As he was meeting Igor Ivanov, the Russian foreign minister was relieved of his duties. Shortly afterwards, President Yeltsin threatened to break off cooperation with NATO. It was another setback for a diplomatic process already in deep trouble following the attack on the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. 5 days after the disastrous NATO attack, the remains of those killed were finally brought home. As the ashes were received with solemn ceremony in Beijing, the mood turned from anger to grief. Leading dignitaries welcomed the survivors. Even as the homecoming continued, the Chinese leadership began moves to heal the rift with the United States. The Chinese media finally reported President Clinton's apology for the attack. At the paint-splattered US embassy, staff have finally been able to emerge after days under virtual siege.
We're out of the embassy. We're very pleased to be out. It's a beautiful spring day in Beijing, and I'm glad not to be sitting in that embassy eating these Marine Corps combat rations.
The Chinese police may have restored order, but there's still no sign of a way out of the diplomatic confrontation between the United States and China. The German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has now arrived in Beijing. He will be trying to persuade Beijing to stop blocking the strategy over Kosovo agreed between NATO and Russia. The diplomatic heat may be off Yugoslavia, but the military attacks continue. NATO says yesterday was the heaviest day of airstrikes, more than 600 across the country. Even Belgrade may be hoping that the diplomatic smoke clears sooner rather than later. John Lyne, BBC News.
And Serbian media reported civilian casualties in attacks on other parts of the country.
Yugoslav state television reported that the largest factory in the town of Valjevo was destroyed, as well as several civilian dwellings and a special police forces barracks. The report said the main highway between Belgrade and Niš was also badly damaged. The official Tanjug news agency reported that NATO also attacked the Kosovar capital, Pristina, and the border area near Montenegro, killing several civilians.
NATO in Yugoslavia and Albania. 2 civilians were reported killed when Serbian forces crossed over the border in an area controlled by the KLA. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Sadako Ogata, says her organization is running out of money to deal with the Kosovo crisis. She appealed to European governments to shoulder more of the burden of looking after 750,000 people displaced by the conflict. Meanwhile, UNHCR Special Envoy Dennis McNamara is in Montenegro to assess the situation there. McNamara said the arrival of tens of thousands of refugees was causing tension among the population. He also warned that poor sanitary conditions in the camps could lead to an outbreak of disease.
With the God's willing, Secretary General, good afternoon again to you. All of the journalists are now ready, and I'd be very grateful, Secretary General, if you could just say a few words to them, and then we will take some questions as we agreed. Secretary General, please.
Thank you, Jamie, and good afternoon, everybody. I am here in the airport of Skopje. I just arrived from an early morning trip that started at 6 o'clock in the morning to Albania, where I had the opportunity of meeting with the authorities of that country, and then I visited a couple of refugee camps, in particular in the region of Elbasan. Let me say that the reason for this trip is, I would say, threefold. First, to show solidarity to these 2 countries, Fyrom, Macedonia and Albania, which are 2 countries which are committed with us to stop ethnic cleansing, to reverse ethnic cleansing, and at the same time to give support and help to the refugees. Second, to show the fantastic work that is being done by the troops of NATO deployed in both countries, together with the UNHCR people. I convey to you my very deep sentiment that I have been always convinced that the task that we have started to make all the possible efforts for all the refugees to return to their homes, to their country, after having talked to them, I am more and more convinced that we have to continue our battle until we see it through. I like to say that the 5 points that NATO is defending are the very same points that all the refugees are defending. Stop the killing, withdraw the troops, allow the refugees to return. It's a Kosovo, multi-ethnic, safe and democratic, and a political agreement for the future.
Couple of weeks, NATO has celebrated 2 50th anniversaries, 150 years of NATO and 150 days of airstrikes. Which, to you, do you think is going to be the most significant anniversary for the future of NATO? Which one do you think, which period, the 50 days or the 50 years, will make the most difference to the future of NATO, especially if the airstrikes do not succeed in fulfilling their objective?
Well, I think that I don't like to celebrate specific dates. I think that we have a mission, that the mission is going to continue until we obtain the objectives. But let me say that the meeting that we had in Washington not long ago was again a very important meeting, probably the most important of NATO's history, in which the determination of all the 19 allies to continue with our campaign until we see it through was total. And let me also insist that we're not only the 19 countries of the alliance, but another 35 countries that belong to the Partnership for Peace, to the EAPC, were together with us with the same aim, with the same goal. Ethnic cleansing cannot prevail in Europe, and we are making all in our capability to not only to stop it, but to reverse it. That is my aim, that is our aim.
Secretary General, I'd like to ask you to take just one final question, because I know that you have some meetings to go to in a few moments, from Dmitry Karvin of Russian television. So just one final question, and thank you.
Occurs daily video teleconference held this morning. One of our field commanders, which we talk to every day, opened his address by stating, "We have experienced our most successful day of the campaign." This map shows today's extent of Serb ground forces and ground activities, noticing that in Podujevo area it was less heavy than yesterday. If the map would be up. Perhaps because of our previous pounding of Serb air forces. Let me give you a rundown on our operations in more detail now. Our day started around sunrise with a streamed package of 36 aircraft, including A-10s, GR-7 Harriers, E-Tornado, AMXs, F-16s, Jaguars, CF-118s. In the area of Suva-Reka, we attacked military vehicles, revetted artillery, dispersed artillery, and tanks. At the same time, F-16s struck the Kosovoska Mitrovica radio relay station. A late morning package of 32 aircraft, including Tornados, Jaguars, F-16s, AMX, AV-8B Harriers, returned to the Suva-Reka area and repeatedly attacked Serbian forces on the ground. More tanks, vehicles, and troops were struck. In addition, some of these aircraft attacked the Popovac Highway Bridge and the Niš airfield and petroleum facility. The next package of